3 nights ago, a swarm of small boats appeared on U.S. Navy radar screens in the Strait of Hormuz. 73 contacts moving at high speed toward American destroyers. Standard defensive protocols activated. The ships went to battle stations. Close-in weapon systems came online. Sailors manned their posts, expecting another harassment operation, the kind Iran has conducted hundreds of times. Small boats get close. American ships issue warnings. Iranian boats turn away. Routine. Except this time, the boats didn't turn away. And when the first one detonated against the hull of the USS Carney, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, everyone understood this was not routine. This was not harassment. This was a coordinated attack using weaponized autonomous drone boats. And the U.S. Navy, with all its technology, all its firepower, all its $40 billion worth of destroyers in the region, could not stop them. Let me tell you exactly what happened in those waters. Because understanding this attack is understanding why naval warfare just changed permanently. The boats were Shahed 136, maritime variants. Iran calls them Shahed Bar, Sea Witness. These are not the aerial drones you've seen in Ukraine. These are waterborne autonomous vehicles, specifically designed for one purpose, ramming high-value targets at sea. Each boat is approximately 4 meters long, carries 40 kilograms of explosives in the bow, and costs between $500 and $2,000 to manufacture, depending on which components Iran uses. The propulsion system is a modified outboard motor, commercial grade, nothing sophisticated. The guidance system uses a combination of GPS waypoint navigation and optical targeting for the final approach. The boats travel at speeds up to 45 knots. That's roughly 50 miles per hour on water. And they operate in swarms. The attack began at 0347 local time. The USS Carney detected the first contacts at 18 kilometers. Within 90 seconds, the count increased to 73 distinct radar signatures, all converging on the destroyer's position from multiple vectors simultaneously. This is not how traditional naval attacks work. Conventional threats, anti-ship missiles, aircraft, submarines, they come from predictable directions. You can establish defensive perimeters. You can calculate intercept solutions. You can prioritize targets based on threat assessment. 73 small boats moving independently from every direction at once do not allow for prioritization. Every single one is a potential hull breach. Every single one must be destroyed before impact. And the USS Carney carries exactly 96 vertical launch cells for missiles, plus 2 Phalanx CIWS systems for close-in defense. Do the math. That's 96 missiles against 73 targets, assuming every shot kills. But Phalanx guns, the last line of defense, they fire 4,500 rounds per minute using 20mm depleted uranium ammunition. Sounds impressive until you calculate magazine capacity. Each Phalanx mount carries 1,550 rounds. At maximum rate of fire, that's 20 seconds of continuous shooting before the magazine runs dry. The Carney's defensive doctrine worked exactly as designed against the threat it was designed for. The ship's Aegis combat system identified targets, calculated threat vectors, assigned engagement priorities. Standard Missile 2s launched from vertical cells. Engaged the outermost contacts. 6 missiles, 6 kills. Phalanx systems engaged targets that breached the 2-kilometer perimeter. The guns tracked, fired, destroyed. 37 drone boats were eliminated before they could strike. 36 got through. Not all of them hit the Carney. Some targeted the USS Laboon, another destroyer operating 5 kilometers to the north. Some detonated prematurely when damaged by gunfire, but not destroyed. But 11 boats struck the Carney's hull, 11 separate explosions, each carrying 40 kilograms of military-grade explosives. The damage was catastrophic. Hull breaches below the waterline in 3 compartments, fire in the forward missile magazine, flooding in engineering spaces, the explosions ruptured fuel lines, contaminating 2 freshwater tanks, and forcing the crew to rely on emergency desalination systems that were never designed for sustained operation. Secondary damage from the fires disabled the ship's primary electrical distribution panel, forcing it to switch to backup generators that provide only 60% of normal power capacity. 7 sailors dead, 23 wounded. And the Carney, a $1.8 billion warship commissioned in 1996, designed to survive combat in the most hostile environments on Earth, was combat ineffective within 8 minutes of the attack beginning. Here's what the Navy said about this, and I want you to pay close attention to the exact words used because the language matters. The official statement from Fifth Fleet. Command read, U.S. naval forces successfully defended against an attempted attack by Iranian proxies. The majority of hostile contacts were neutralized. Damage to U.S. vessels was minimal and all ships remain operational. Minimal damage. Remain operational. The USS Carney is currently being towed to Bahrain by the USNS John Glenn, a Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo ship, because the destroyer's own propulsion system is offline. The ship lists 7 degrees to port because counter-flooding measures have not fully stabilized the vessel. The forward vertical launch system is offline because fire suppression flooded the magazine with seawater. The Aegis radar is operating at reduced capacity because power distribution was compromised. The ship's commanding officer, Captain Richard Hoffman, was medevaced to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany for injuries sustained during the attack. His executive officer now commands what remains of the crew from a backup combat information center that was never intended for primary operations. 7 Americans are dead. This is what the Pentagon calls minimal damage and operational status. I'm telling you what those words actually mean, translated from institutional preservation language into operational reality. The ship is crippled. It will require months of repairs. And the Navy is calling this a defensive success because they cannot afford to call it what it actually is. A demonstration that American surface vessels operating in the Persian Gulf are now vulnerable to weapons that cost less than the missiles used to defend against them. Let me give you the cost breakdown because this is where the mathematics become unavoidable. Each Shahid Bahar drone boat cost approximately $500 to $2,000 depending on production scale and component sourcing. Iran launched 73 boats. Total cost to Iran, somewhere between $36,500 and $146,000. Let's be generous and assume Iran used premium components. Call it $150,000 for the entire attack. The USS Carney fired 6 Standard Missile 2 interceptors. Each SM-2 costs $2.4 million, that's $14.4 million in missiles expended. The failing systems fired an estimated 45,000 rounds of ammunition. Each 20 millimeter round costs approximately $27. That's another $1.2 million. The ship itself, $1.8 billion in construction costs, now requires repairs estimated at $400 million and 8 months in dry dock. 7 sailors killed, each trained at a cost of approximately $250,000 to the Navy for specialized destroyer operations. 23 wounded requiring immediate medical evacuation and long-term care. Iran spent $150,000. The United States lost $400 million in repair costs, $15.6 million in defensive expenditures, and 7 irreplaceable lives. This is not a trade ratio that can be sustained. This is not a defensive success. This is a mathematical demonstration that the attacker holds the advantage in this equation. And here's what should terrify every strategic planner in the Pentagon. Iran has the industrial capacity to produce these drone boats at a rate of approximately 200 units per month. That's based on confirmed production facilities, identified by satellite imagery and corroborated by Iranian state media reports celebrating domestic drone manufacturing capabilities. The production infrastructure is dispersed across 12 known facilities, making it nearly impossible to neutralize through airstrikes without a sustained campaign that would require hundreds of sorties. The entire attack that crippled the Carney represented less than half of Iran's monthly production capacity for this one weapon system. The U.S. Navy has 69 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Each one carries between 90 and 96 vertical launch cells. Not all of those cells contain anti-air missiles. Some carry Tomahawk cruise missiles. Some carry anti-submarine rockets. Let's assume 60 cells per destroyer are loaded with SM-2 or SM-6 missiles for air defense. That's 4,140 missiles across the entire destroyer fleet. Production time for one SM-2 missile is approximately 14 months from raw materials to delivery. The United States cannot manufacture these interceptors faster than Iran can manufacture the drones they're designed to shoot down. Now let me tell you what's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz, because the attack on the Carney was not an isolated incident. It was a demonstration. 3 days after the Carney attack, Iranian state television broadcast footage of drone boat production facilities. They showed assembly lines, workers installing guidance systems, boats being loaded onto transport trucks. The message was explicit. We can do this again and again, and we can do it at scale. Fifth Fleet repositioned. The carrier strike group that was operating 150 kilometers from the Iranian coast moved to 400 kilometers. Destroyers that were conducting freedom of navigation operations in the Strait now maintain standoff distances that keep them outside the estimated range of Iran's drone boat swarms. The U.S. Navy, which has controlled these waters since 1945, has ceded operational space to an adversary using $500 boats. Let me explain why American defenses cannot solve this problem. Because this is not about training or readiness or tactics. This is about physics and mathematics and target saturation. The Phalanx CIWS is the last line defense against incoming threats. It's a radar-guided 20mm Gatling gun mounted on the ship's superstructure. The system can engage targets out to 2 kilometers with high probability of kill. But the system has 3 fundamental limitations that make it ineffective against drone swarms. First, engagement rate. The Phalanx can track and engage one target at a time. The radar locks, the gun slews, the system fires a burst, evaluates the kill, moves to the next target. Against a single incoming missile, this works. Against 5 boats approaching simultaneously from different vectors, the system has to choose. It engages 1 boat while 4 others close the distance. Second, ammunition capacity. 150 rounds sounds like a lot until you calculate engagement requirements. A typical engagement against a small, fast-moving target requires 200 to 300 rounds to guarantee destruction. That's 5 to 7 targets maximum before the magazine is empty. Reloading takes 15 minutes with a trained crew working at maximum efficiency. 15 minutes is forever in naval combat. Third, minimum engagement range. The phalanx cannot engage targets closer than 500 meters. The radar cannot maintain lock. The gun cannot depress low enough. The system is blind. A drone boat traveling at 45 knots covers 500 meters in 21 seconds. If the boat gets inside that bubble, the phalanx cannot stop it. Iran's tactics exploit every single one of these limitations. The swarm attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously, forcing the phalanx to choose targets. The boats approach in waves, depleting ammunition. And they're designed to penetrate that final 500-meter dead zone where the guns cannot engage. The Navy knows this. Internal assessments conducted after the Carney attack concluded that current defensive systems are inadequate against massed drone boat attacks. The assessments recommended 3 solutions: increase the number of close-in weapon systems per ship, develop directed energy weapons capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously, or avoid operating within range of Iranian drone boat launch sites. The first solution requires retrofitting every surface combatant in the fleet. Cost, approximately $15 billion. Timeline, 8 years. The second solution requires technology that doesn't exist in deployable form yet. Laser systems powerful enough to destroy hardened targets at sea require power generation capacity that current ships cannot provide. The third solution means ceding the Persian Gulf to Iran. None of these options are acceptable. All of them are necessary. And the Navy is paralyzed between recognition of the threat and an inability to counter it without fundamental restructuring of fleet composition and operational doctrine. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now. Because the information you're getting here is the analysis that briefing rooms see but public statements hide. The gap between what's happening and what you're told is happening has never been wider. Let me tell you what Iran proved with this attack. They proved that asymmetric warfare at sea is not theoretical anymore. They proved that expensive platforms are vulnerable to cheap weapons when deployed in sufficient quantity. They proved that American naval dominance is not a fact of nature. It's a product of technological and numerical advantages that can be neutralized by adversaries willing to trade quantity for quality. This is the same logic that's playing out in Ukraine. Russian drones that cost $20,000 are destroying Western tanks that cost $8 million. Ukrainian sea drones that cost $250,000 are sinking Russian warships worth $750 million. The defender always loses the cost equation because destroying a threat costs more than creating it. And here's the strategic implication that should keep everyone awake at night. If Iran can do this to American destroyers in the Persian Gulf, what stops China from doing the same thing to American carriers in the Taiwan Strait? China has been watching this. China has been studying Iranian drone boat tactics. China has coastal production facilities that can manufacture autonomous waterborne attack vehicles at scales that make Iranian production look trivial. Chinese shipyards that currently produce commercial vessels can be retooled to manufacture drone boats at rates exceeding 1,000 units per month if conflict appears imminent. The U.S. Pacific Fleet operates on the assumption that carrier strike groups can maintain sea control within the first island chain. That assumption requires surface vessels to operate within 500 kilometers of the Chinese coast. If China deploys drone boat swarms using the same saturation tactics Iran just demonstrated, American carriers face the same mathematics that crippled the Carney. Thousands of targets, limited interceptors, insufficient close-in defenses, vulnerability. American naval strategy for 80 years has been built on platform superiority. Better ships, better weapons, better training. That strategy worked when adversaries tried to match American capabilities, platform for platform. It fails when adversaries choose not to compete on American terms. Iran didn't build a navy to challenge the U.S. Navy. Iran built $500 drone boats that American billion-dollar destroyers cannot stop in sufficient numbers. That's not a technological failure. That's a strategic failure to recognize that the nature of naval warfare has changed and American doctrine has not. The USS Carney is in dry dock. 7 sailors are dead. And the Navy is telling you this was a defensive success. I'm telling you this was a warning. Iran used less than half of 1 month's production capacity to cripple 1 destroyer. What happens when they use full production for a month against an entire carrier strike group? The mathematics are not complicated. They're just uncomfortable. And institutions do not like acknowledging uncomfortable mathematics because it requires admitting that decades of procurement decisions and strategic assumptions were built on a paradigm that no longer applies. Share this video because the mainstream coverage showed you the Pentagon statement and moved on. They didn't do the cost analysis. They didn't calculate ammunition expenditure rates. They didn't explain why the ship is being towed when the Navy says it's operational. They didn't connect this attack to the broader pattern of asymmetric warfare that's redefining modern conflict. You just got the analysis that matters. The numbers that explain why this isn't an isolated incident. It's a preview. Iran spent $150,000 and changed the calculus of naval power in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy is still trying to figure out how to respond without admitting. The problem is unsolvable with current systems. 73 boats, 11 hits, 7 dead. $400 million in damage. That's not minimal. That's not a success. That's what happens when $500 weapons meet $40 billion fleets, and the weapons win.